The engine sputtered and died in the empty parking lot. Inside, a little girl clutched her teddy bear, watching her mother try for the fourth time. Only 20 minutes remained before the important interview. A man in a simple black shirt approached, gently tapping on the window. "Can I help?" The mother's cautious gaze met calloused hands with traces of engine oil. The little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve, whispering, "That's Sophie's dad. He fixes broken things." The autumn leaves drifted lazily across the damp sidewalks of Chicago on this crisp October morning. David Chen woke at 5 o'clock in his small suburban apartment. Soft yellow light filtered through worn curtains as he quietly prepared breakfast, careful not to wake Sophie. On the wall hung a photograph of his late wife, Maya, smiling beside the vintage car they had restored together. David ran his fingers over an old car key with a heart-shaped keychain, her final gift before the accident, now his constant lucky charm. The apartment was modest but clean, filled with the subtle aroma of coffee and the lingering scent of motor oil that never quite washed away from his hands, no matter how hard he scrubbed. After gently waking Sophie and helping her prepare for school, David drove his old pickup truck loaded with tools to his small workshop nestled among Chicago's towering skyscrapers. The hand-painted wooden sign, reading "Second Chance Repairs," swayed in the autumn breeze. His customers were mostly working people who couldn't afford the high prices of dealership garages. David often accepted flexible payments, sometimes just a home-cooked meal, or a promise to help someone else when they could. The workshop walls were lined with meticulously organized tools, each with its designated place, while classic rock played softly from an old radio perched on a shelf above his workbench. Sophie, with her curly brown hair and large eyes so like her mother's, loved helping her father at the workshop after school. She had her own toolbox, a red-painted box containing safe, small tools, and a notebook filled with her invented car designs. She was a bright, curious child who absorbed knowledge like a sponge, especially anything related to cars and engines. David encouraged her questions, patiently explaining how things worked, never dismissing her ideas no matter how fantastical. Their relationship was built on mutual respect and gentle understanding, forged stronger through shared grief and healing. Across town, in a luxury high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago's impressive skyline, Natalie Parker awoke precisely at 6 o'clock blank. She completed her yoga routine and checked her emails before waking her daughter, Zoe. The penthouse was immaculate, minimalist, and expensive, every item carefully selected for both function and aesthetic appeal. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was unnecessary. The morning light bounced off glass and chrome surfaces, creating an almost clinical brightness throughout the space. The kitchen counters gleamed without a single fingerprint or water spot. Natalie gently touched the silver bracelet on her wrist, a gift Zoe had made in class, with uneven beads the only imperfect piece of jewelry in her collection. Today was crucial, an interview for an executive marketing director position that could transform both her career and their lives. Her wardrobe was filled with designer suits and dresses, each one carefully selected to project confidence and success. Her schedule was planned down to the minute, with color-coded calendar entries filling her smartphone screen. Everything in her life was controlled, organized, and purposeful. Zoe, a shy 6-year-old with a love for books and an active imagination, often felt alone despite being surrounded by the best of everything. She carried an old teddy bear named Brave, the last gift from her father before he disappeared from her life. She was a quiet child, observing more than speaking, with large, thoughtful eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. Her bedroom was filled with books rather than toys, and she often retreated into fictional worlds when reality became too overwhelming or lonely. The contrast between the two single parents couldn't have been more stark. David lived paycheck to paycheck in a neighborhood where sirens occasionally disturbed the night, while Natalie's life was cushioned by financial security in a building with 24-hour security. David's hands were calloused and permanently stained with traces of motor oil. Natalie's were perfectly manicured and soft. They inhabited separate worlds divided by income, lifestyle, and social circles, worlds that were never meant to intersect. Early morning at Oakwood Elementary School. David drove Sophie to class, his old pickup truck standing out among the luxury vehicles of other parents. Sophie wore a hand-sewn jacket adorned with tool-shaped patches that David added whenever she learned a new repair skill. The fabric was slightly faded from multiple washes, but Sophie wore it with unmistakable pride. Other children arrived in designer clothes, but none had garments that told stories like hers did. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of eventual winter. Meanwhile, Natalie rushed Zoe to school in her gleaming Mercedes. She constantly checked her watch and spoke through her earpiece to her assistant about the upcoming interview. Zoe hugged Brave tightly, gazing out the window with sad eyes. The car interior smelled of expensive leather and Natalie's signature perfume. Classical music played softly from the premium sound system, though neither passenger seemed to notice it. Natalie's fingers tapped impatiently on the steering wheel at each red light, as if she could will the traffic to move faster. When the school bell rang, Sophie ran to hug David. "I love you, Dad. I'll tell you about my new science project this afternoon." David bent down, adjusting her wool hat. "I'll pick you up on time, my little engineer." He handed Sophie the heart keychain to keep for the day. "Dad always has a key to come back to you." His voice was gentle but steady, a constant reassurance in her young life. They had a ritual of touching foreheads before parting. Something that had started spontaneously after Maya's funeral, and had since become their special goodbye. Natalie quickly kissed Zoe's forehead. "I'll try to pick you up early, but if I can't make it, Miss Miranda will get you." Zoe nodded, accustomed to her mother's busy schedule. "Good luck with your interview," she whispered, reaching up to touch the silver bracelet on her mother's wrist in what had become their ritual. Natalie's expression softened momentarily as she looked at her daughter, guilt and love mingling in her eyes. She straightened Zoe's collar before hurrying back to her car, already mentally rehearsing her interview responses. In the classroom, Sophie and Zoe were seated next to each other. Sophie, cheerful and outgoing, shared stories about fixing cars with her father over the weekend. Zoe listened, fascinated by tales of tools and machinery. The two girls quickly bonded, exchanging colored pencils and sharing lunch. Sophie's animated descriptions of engines and repairs brought a rare smile to Zoe's usually serious face. By recess, they were inseparable, creating elaborate stories about magical cars that could fly and travel underwater. Late afternoon, Natalie drove away from the office building, feeling confident about her interview. 40 minutes remained before school ended, just enough time to pick up Zoe, a rare promise she could keep this week. But when she tried to start her car in the parking lot, the engine made a disturbing grinding noise before dying completely. The sophisticated dashboard lit up with warning symbols she didn't understand. Her heart sank as she realized what this might mean for her promise to Zoe. After several unsuccessful attempts, Natalie called roadside assistance, but they reported it would take at least an hour to arrive. She called Zoe's teacher, explained the situation, and promised to come as soon as possible. Her eyes reddened with disappointment, another broken promise to Zoe. She felt the familiar knot of guilt tightening in her stomach, knowing that her daughter would be waiting, watching other children leave with their parents, wondering why her mother wasn't there yet again. Just then, David drove his pickup truck past the parking lot, heading to school to pick up Sophie. He noticed a woman clearly having trouble with her luxury car. Although it was almost time to get Sophie, David stopped. He knew the helpless feeling of not being able to reach your child on time. The woman looked familiar. He had seen her dropping off her daughter at Oakwood, the quiet girl Sophie had mentioned at dinner last night. His conscience wouldn't allow him to drive past someone in trouble, especially another parent. "Can I help?" David tapped gently on Natalie's car window. The approaching stranger startled her from her thoughts of Zoe waiting alone at school. Years of city living had taught her caution around strangers, especially men approaching her vehicle. Natalie lowered her window, eyeing the plainly dressed man with engine oil on his hands suspiciously. "I've already called professional service, thank you." Her tone was polite but dismissive, a clear social barrier erected between them. Her gaze flickered to his stained hands and worn clothing, making instant judgments about who he was and what he wanted. David nodded, understanding her reaction. "I understand. But I'm a mechanic, and I recognize that it might be an issue with the starter. I could check quickly in 5 minutes, and if I can't help, you can still wait for your service." He kept a respectful distance, his voice calm and professional. He was used to being judged by his appearance, by the permanent oil stains on his hands that no amount of scrubbing could remove. Natalie glanced at her watch, thinking of Zoe waiting. "All right, 5 minutes," she reluctantly agreed. The thought of her daughter sitting alone while other children were picked up by their parents outweighed her caution. She watched through the rearview mirror as David retrieved a small toolbox from his truck, his movements efficient and practiced. David quickly inspected and identified the problem. "Your starter relay is loose. I can fix it temporarily so you can drive, but it will need replacement soon." He pointed to a small component under the hood, explaining in simple terms what had happened and how he could resolve it. There was no condescension in his explanation, just clear information delivered efficiently. "Please," Natalie nodded. "I need to pick up my daughter." Her normally composed voice cracked slightly with the admission. For a moment, they weren't divided by social status or income. They were just two parents who understood the importance of being there for their children. As David worked beneath the car, Natalie received a call from the company. "We were very impressed. Would like to see you again tomorrow with the executive board." She turned away, focusing on the important call, not noticing that David had completed the work. She smiled at the positive feedback, mentally rearranging her schedule for the follow-up interview while David closed the hood quietly, trying not to interrupt her conversation. When David stood up, clothes smeared with oil, Natalie had just ended her call. She checked her watch, startled to realize she was running later than planned. The stress returned to her face as she calculated whether she could still reach the school before the aftercare program would start charging extra fees. "It's done," David said. "The car should." Natalie quickly offered a $100 bill. "Thank you so much. Keep the change." The gesture was automatic. Problems in her world were solved with money, services were paid for, and transactions were completed. The bill was extended between them like a shield, maintaining the boundary between their worlds. David didn't take the money. "I didn't do it for money. Just helping another parent get to their child on time." He wiped his hands on a rag from his pocket, leaving the bill hanging in the air between them. The refusal surprised her in her experience. Everyone had a price. Everyone accepted payment for services rendered. "I don't need charity," Natalie replied, still holding out the money. "Everyone has their price." The words came out harsher than she intended, a defensive reaction to his unexpected refusal. Something about his rejection of her money made her uncomfortable, as if he'd broken an unspoken rule of their different social worlds. "Not everything can be bought, Mrs. Parker," David replied, his voice deepening as he noticed Natalie's name on her employee badge. "Sometimes we just help each other because it's the right thing to do." His words weren't judgmental, just a simple statement of his personal philosophy. He'd learned after Maya's death that the most valuable things, time, love, kindness, couldn't be purchased at any price. "How do you know my name?" Natalie suddenly became alert, her city-honed caution flaring again. Her hand instinctively moved toward her purse, where her phone was stored, ready to call for help if needed. "Your employee badge," David pointed out, then checked his phone. "I need to go now. Sophie is waiting." He gathered his tools quickly, aware that each passing minute meant his daughter was waiting longer. He offered a polite nod before turning away, not expecting or waiting for further thanks. As David walked away, Natalie realized her misunderstanding. She started the car, surprised when it ran perfectly. Looking through the rearview mirror, she watched David drive away in his old truck, suddenly wondering, "Do I judge others too quickly based on appearance and financial value?" The thought was uncomfortable, challenging perspectives she'd held for years without questioning. She sat for a moment, engine idling, before putting the car in drive and heading toward Oakwood Elementary. Late afternoon at Oakwood School. Zoe sat alone on a wooden bench, hugging Brave tightly, while other children gradually left with their parents. Sophie waited beside her, doodling in her design notebook. The playground was growing quieter, as more families departed, leaving behind an emptiness that seemed to emphasize Zoe's solitude. The afternoon shadows lengthened across the asphalt, and a cool breeze rustled the remaining leaves on the oak trees that gave the school its name. "My dad should be here soon," Sophie said, trying to comfort Zoe. "Your mom too." She continued sketching, her pencil moving confidently across the page, occasionally glancing up to check the parking lot for signs of her father's truck. Her presence was a comfort to Zoe, who had grown used to waiting alone at the end of school days. Zoe nodded, eyes downcast. "Mom has an important interview. She's always busy, but today she promised she'd come early." Her voice was soft, resigned, as if she'd learned not to expect too much to avoid disappointment. She squeezed Brave a little tighter, finding comfort in the familiar softness of the well-worn teddy bear. Sophie sat down beside Zoe. "Look, I drew a car that can fly. Dad says it can't be built, but he keeps all my drawings anyway." Her smile was bright and encouraging as she showed Zoe the detailed sketch with childish but creative elements, wings attached to a car body, with a special compartment for a teddy bear passenger clearly inspired by Brave. She pulled out the key with the heart keychain. "This is my dad's lucky charm. He says it helps him always find his way home." The metal gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. The heart-shaped attachment slightly scratched from years of use but still intact. Sophie held it reverently, aware of its importance to her father. Zoe gently touched the key. "It's beautiful. I have this," she pointed to a bracelet identical to Natalie's that she wore. "I made two, one for me and one for Mom. She wears hers every day." Pride filled her voice, a rare moment of confidence from the usually shy girl. The uneven beads caught the light, imperfect but meaningful in a way store-bought jewelry could never be. David arrived first, hurrying from his truck. "Sorry I'm late, Sophie." His face showed concern as he approached the bench where the girls sat. He had driven as quickly as safety allowed, worried about his daughter waiting alone. Sophie ran to hug her father. "It's okay, Dad. I was talking with my new friend Zoe. She's waiting for her mom too. The hug was tight and genuine, both of them holding on for an extra moment, their ritual of reconnection after being apart. David looked at the blonde girl sitting alone. Hello, Zoe. Is your mom coming soon? His voice was gentle, pitched to avoid frightening the clearly shy child. He crouched down to her level, maintaining a respectful distance while offering a friendly smile. Zoe nodded slightly. Mom said so. But sometimes she's busy. The resignation in her young voice spoke volumes about how often she had been in this situation before. She clutched Brave closer, finding security in the familiar toy. David looked around, seeing the nearly empty schoolyard, with only one teacher checking her watch. He couldn't bear to leave the child alone. The memory of how he'd felt when Maya died, that complete abandonment and helplessness made it impossible for him to walk away from another child, experiencing even a fraction of that feeling. Sophie, what do you think about waiting with Zoe until her mom arrives? He kept his tone light, making it sound like a choice rather than a sacrifice. Sophie's immediate enthusiastic nod confirmed they were of the same mind. Not long after, Natalie rushed into the schoolyard, hair disheveled and breathing heavily. Zoe. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. She had parked haphazardly, focused only on reaching her daughter as quickly as possible. Relief and guilt warred on her face as she approached the bench. Zoe ran to embrace her mother. Mom! You came. The surprise and joy in her voice revealed how rare this timely arrival was, despite Natalie's promise. Her small arms wrapped tightly around her mother's waist, face pressed against the expensive fabric of Natalie's suit. Natalie hugged her daughter tightly. My car had problems, but fortunately. She trailed off as she recognized David. The coincidence was startling. The mechanic who had helped her was apparently the father of her daughter's new friend. Chicago suddenly felt very small. You? Natalie's surprise was evident in her voice and expression. The man who had refused her money, who had spoken about helping others as the right thing to do, was standing before her again. In the context of the schoolyard, with his daughter beside him, he appeared different, not just a mechanic with dirty hands, but a father who had kept his promise to his child. Hello, Mrs. Parker. David nodded politely, keeping his distance but offering a small smile of recognition. He made no mention of their earlier encounter, asking for neither acknowledgement nor gratitude. Dad, you know Zoe's mom? Sophie asked curiously, looking between the adults with interest. Children were often quick to notice connections, to build bridges between their separate worlds. Her eyes brightened at the possibility that this might mean more opportunities to play with her new friend. I helped Mrs. Parker's car start again, David explained simply, not elaborating on the details or Natalie's initial reluctance to accept his help. He saw no need to complicate the children's budding friendship with adult misunderstandings. Thank you for that, Natalie said, her voice more sincere than before. And thank you for staying with Zoe. Her gratitude was genuine now, the corporate mask temporarily set aside as she acknowledged his kindness. She had spent the drive to school thinking about their brief interaction, questioning her own assumptions. While the girls retrieved their backpacks, Natalie twisted the silver bracelet on her wrist. I didn't behave well at the parking lot. I apologize for that. The admission was difficult for her. Acknowledging mistakes didn't come easily to someone who had built her career on projecting perfect competence. It's fine, David smiled. We all have difficult days. His forgiveness came easily, without conditions or expectations. He had learned through his own grief that people were often fighting battles others couldn't see, and that kindness cost nothing but meant everything. Mom, Zoe called, pulling Natalie toward Sophie. This is my new friend Sophie. We sit together in class. Can I invite Sophie over this weekend? Please, Mom. The excitement in Zoe's voice was unusual, a departure from her typical quiet reserve. Natalie couldn't remember the last time she'd seen such enthusiasm from her daughter. Natalie smiled at seeing her daughter's rare excitement. Of course, if Sophie's father agrees. She glanced at David, extending an olive branch of sorts. The social gap between them remained, but perhaps it could be bridged for the sake of their daughters. Dad, please? Sophie looked at David with pleading eyes, the universal expression of children seeking permission for something important to them. Her hand automatically reached for his, a gesture of affection and persuasion combined. Perhaps you could discuss a specific day, David suggested, not wanting to impose or assume. He was careful not to overstep, aware of the social chasm between their families and lifestyles. The last thing he wanted was for Sophie to experience rejection because of their economic differences. As they walked toward the parking lot, Emma told Zoe about her father's repair shop and how he fixes everything that's broken. Zoe listened intently, eyes wide with admiration. Children often saw past the barriers adults constructed, focusing instead on what truly mattered: kindness, attention, and genuine connection. His car is an antique, Natalie whispered as she glanced at David's truck. The comment wasn't meant to be overheard, just an observation to herself about the stark differences in their lives. The vehicle looked like it belonged in a museum rather than on Chicago's busy streets. It's a 1967 truck that Dad restored himself, Sophie said proudly, having overheard. Dad says old things have souls. She repeated her father's words with complete conviction, believing them entirely. To her, the truck wasn't old, it was special, filled with stories and memories. Natalie looked at her Mercedes. My car is just a car. The admission felt strange on her lips, an acknowledgement that despite its price tag and status symbol, her vehicle held no personal significance, no emotional connection. It was a means of transportation, nothing more. But it's beautiful, Zoe said. Like in movies. Her comment was innocent, revealing how she viewed her mother's world: glossy and perfect, like something from the screen rather than something lived in and loved. The comparison was inadvertently revealing of the emotional distance in their luxurious life. As they separated to go to their respective vehicles, David suddenly realized. Sophie, you still have Dad's key, right? The slight worry in his voice betrayed the importance of the item: not just a key, but a connection to Maya, to their past, to the love that had shaped their family. Sophie checked her pockets, then looked up in panic. I can't find it, Dad. I showed it to Zoe and then. Her voice trembled as she realized she had lost something precious to her father. Tears welled in her eyes as she frantically searched her jacket pockets again. David tried to remain calm, though the key was the last physical connection to Maya. It's okay, sweetheart, we'll find it. He kept his voice steady for Sophie's sake, though his heart raced at the thought of losing this final tangible link to his wife. Some objects carried meaning beyond their physical value. The key was one such treasure. Zoe also searched her pockets and backpack, but found nothing. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Her voice was small and frightened, worried she had caused a problem. She looked ready to cry, feeling responsible for the loss of something clearly important. Don't worry, Zoe, David reassured her. Maybe it fell at the schoolyard. We can go back and check. His kindness extended naturally to the upset child, his instinct to comfort overriding his personal distress. Children always came first in his world, their feelings prioritized above his own. When they returned to the now empty schoolyard, searching under the bench and around the area where the girls had been sitting, Catherine recognized the importance of the key through David's concerned expression. His calm exterior couldn't completely hide the tension in his shoulders or the worry in his eyes, as he methodically searched through fallen leaves. Is it something very important to you? Natalie asked quietly, joining the search effort despite her designer heels sinking slightly into the soft ground beneath the trees. She had picked up on his controlled anxiety, reading between the lines of his forced composure. David nodded, voice lowering. The last gift from my wife before she died in a car accident 3 years ago. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken grief. He rarely spoke about Maya to strangers, but the circumstances demanded honesty. Natalie stood still, suddenly understanding more about this man. The loss explained something about him: his patience, his kindness, his willingness to help others without expectation of return. Grief had either broken or transformed him, and clearly, he had chosen the latter path. We'll help you look, she said, then organized a systematic search pattern. Despite her heels and expensive suit, she crouched to check under benches and scan the ground carefully. The interview and promotion suddenly seemed less important compared to this simple human need before her. After 20 minutes of unsuccessful searching, the sun was fading. David sighed. Perhaps we should head home. Sophie needs dinner and homework time. His resignation was palpable but controlled, accepting the loss with the same quiet dignity with which he seemed to face life's challenges. As they returned to the parking lot, Sophie suddenly exclaimed, "Dad. Maybe it fell when I ran to hug you when you arrived." Her young mind made connections adults might miss, remembering specific moments and movements that could explain the key's disappearance. They searched near David's truck and, as predicted, the key lay beneath a pile of leaves, the heart keychain glinting in the sunset's golden light. The relief on David's face was profound, a weight visibly lifting from his shoulders as he carefully picked up the treasured item. David held it tightly, overwhelming relief evident. "Thank you for helping us," he said to Natalie and Zoe, genuine gratitude in his voice. The key represented more than metal, it was memory, connection, and love made tangible. Natalie smiled. "Perhaps we should exchange phone numbers to arrange the girls' playdate this weekend?" She offered her phone, an unexpected bridge between their separate worlds. Something had shifted in her perception of this man, seeing beyond his occupation and appearance to the devoted father and kind person underneath. As David saved his number, Natalie realized she had never seen Zoe so eager to make a friend. And though she wouldn't admit it openly, she was curious about the mechanic who had refused her money just to help someone else. In a world where everything had a price tag, his simple kindness stood out as something rare and valuable. When the families parted ways, Sophie whispered to Zoe, "My dad can fix anything that's broken." The childish confidence in her father's abilities was touching in its completeness. To her, he was capable of solving any problem, mending any damage. Zoe watched David's retreating figure, then turned to her mother. "Mom, do you think he can fix broken hearts too?" The innocent question carried layers of meaning about Natalie's loneliness since the divorce, about Zoe's missing father, about the emotional distance that had grown between them despite their physical proximity. Some questions, asked in childhood simplicity, cut straight to life's deepest truths. A month passed. The relationship between the two families developed through weekend meetups and playdates. Today, David was at second chance repairs with Sophie and Zoe. The girls wore small aprons, helping with simple tasks, while David changed the oil in an old car. The workshop was warm despite the autumn chill outside, filled with the comfortable sounds of tools against metal and classic rock playing softly in the background. The girls had developed their own friendship rhythm, with Sophie often taking the lead and Zoe following with quiet enthusiasm. "Mr. Chen, how do you know how to fix everything?" Zoe asked, curious eyes following David's skilled hands. She had become more talkative around him, her natural curiosity emerging from beneath her shyness. The question was asked with genuine admiration rather than just politeness. "Dad used to be a car engineer," Sophie explained proudly before David could answer. "He designed engines for big companies, but then he quit to open this shop." Her voice conveyed complete confidence in her father's abilities and decisions. In her eyes, he had chosen the better, more noble path. David smiled sadly. "I realize that sometimes fixing broken things is more important than creating new ones." The simple statement held deeper meaning after Maya's death. He had found healing in restoration rather than innovation, in mending what was damaged rather than pursuing the cutting edge. His workshop had become a metaphor for his approach to life, giving second chances to things others might discard. David's phone rang, Natalie calling. Their communication had increased gradually over the past weeks. Initially about the girls, but eventually including casual conversation. There was an ease developing between them. A slow dismantling of the barriers that had seemed so impenetrable during their first meeting. "David? Can you talk?" Natalie's voice sounded tense. "I'm on my way to an important presentation with the executive board, and my car is making a strange noise. I'm afraid to drive any further." The stress in her voice was evident. This presentation represented the culmination of her work toward the promotion she had been pursuing for months. David checked his watch. He had promised to finish the car he was working on within the next hour. It belonged to a taxi driver who needed it to earn his living. Commitments mattered to David, his word was his bond. Yet he could hear the genuine concern in Natalie's voice. "Where are you?" he asked, already making his decision. Some promises could be delayed with proper explanation. Others, like helping someone in need, took precedence. He would need to call the taxi driver, explain the situation, and ask for a few hours' grace. 20 minutes later, David found Natalie beside her Mercedes parked on the roadside, her face tense as she repeatedly checked her watch. Her normally perfect appearance showed signs of stress: a loose strand of hair, slightly smudged lipstick from nervous lip biting. The presentation materials were visible in the passenger seat, meticulously prepared and organized. "Thank you so much," Natalie sighed with relief when she saw the familiar truck. "I really didn't know who else to call." The admission revealed how their relationship had evolved from reluctant stranger to trusted contact in moments of crisis. She had bypassed the roadside assistance service that came with her luxury vehicle, calling David instead. David quickly inspected the car. "The fan belt is loose. I can fix it temporarily so you can get to your meeting, but it will need replacement afterward." His diagnosis was prompt and clear, his movements efficient as he retrieved tools from his truck. Years of experience allowed him to identify problems quickly, without wasted motion or time. While David worked, Zoe and Sophie sat in the truck, drawing pictures and chatting. Their friendship had flourished naturally, each providing something the other needed. Sophie's confidence encouraging Zoe's self-expression, while Zoe's thoughtfulness tempering Sophie's occasional impulsiveness. "Emma, could your dad and my mom get married?" Zoe suddenly asked, her voice hushed, but hopeful. The question emerged from weeks of observation, from noticing subtle changes in both adults' behavior when they were together. Sophie looked up, surprised. "You want that?" The idea hadn't occurred to her, though she had noticed her father smiling more often lately. The prospect of gaining both a sister and a mother figure was suddenly intriguing. Zoe nodded. Mom laughs more when she's around your dad. And I'd like you to be my sister. Her simple logic cut through complex adult emotions to the essential truth: happiness and connection were what mattered, regardless of backgrounds or circumstances. Sophie smiled. I'd like you as my sister too. The girl's easy acceptance of possibilities that adults might find complicated was refreshing in its simplicity. They saw only the potential for happiness, not the social or economic barriers. Outside, David closed the hood. Done. You can drive now, but don't exceed 25 miles per hour, and come to my shop right after your meeting for a complete replacement. His instructions were clear and practical, focused on ensuring her safety while getting her to her important appointment. Natalie exhaled with relief. Thank you, David. I don't know what I would do without you. The words were spoken with genuine gratitude, without the defensive edge that had characterized their first meeting. Something fundamental had shifted in how she viewed him and his role in their lives. As David turned to leave, Natalie called after him. You're not going to ask about this meeting? The question contained an invitation to share more of her life. To cross the boundary from service provider to something more personal, perhaps friend. Perhaps something else entirely. David paused. I assumed it was important to you, so it's important, period. His response reflected his straightforward approach to relationships: respect for others' priorities without judgment or comparison. He didn't need to understand the corporate world to recognize what mattered to her.